The massive doors of the Galaxy Council chamber opened with a deep, echoing sound that filled the enormous space. Ambassador Kim Tae-ho walked through those doors with steady steps, his black diplomatic uniform neat and pressed. Behind him came three other humans, Admiral Park Ji-woo in her navy blue military dress, General Lee Bo-ram wearing army green with silver stars on her shoulders, and Dr. Choi Hee-jin in simple civilian clothes carrying a datapad. The chamber was huge beyond imagination. The ceiling stretched up so high that clouds could form inside it. Thousands of seats arranged in circles faced the center-speaking platform. Each seat was made for a different species, some built for creatures with wings, others for beings that needed water tanks, and many for shapes that humans could barely understand. Tae-ho had been coming to these council meetings for 5 years now. Each time he felt small in this place. The other species were older, stronger, and controlled more star systems than humanity could dream of. But today felt different. Today he carried a message that would change everything, as the human delegation took their assigned seats in the smaller section, marked for minor species. The chamber, filled with the sounds of 100 different languages. The Sith Dominion representatives made hissing sounds to each other. The crystalline Zephyrians glowed with soft colors as they communicated. The machine-like beings from the Nexus Confederation beeped and clicked in their electronic language. Counselor Vextar of the Sith Dominion was already at his speaking position. His reptilian face showed the kind of boredom that came from dealing with what he considered unimportant matters. His scales were dark green with gold patterns that marked him as high-ranking among his people. When he spoke, his forked tongue flicked out between sharp teeth. "The Council will now hear from the Terran Federation," Vextar announced. His translator made his words sound even more dismissive than they probably were in his own language. Tae-ho stood up and walked to the center platform. He had practiced this speech many times, but his heart still beat fast. Around him, delegates from hundreds of worlds watched with expressions ranging from mild interest to open amusement. He knew what they thought of humans. Young species, barely out of their own solar system. No real power or influence. "Honorable delegates," Tae-ho began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's sound system. "I come before you today representing not just the Terran Federation, but all human colonies throughout our space." High Delegate Morgeth of the Zephyrian Collective pulsed with what Tae-ho had learned was their version of polite attention. Her crystal body caught the chamber's lights and threw rainbow patterns on the walls around her seat. 3 months ago, the Kelvin Empire began attacks on human settlements in the Outer Rim sectors. Tae-ho continued. These were not military targets. These were farming communities, research stations, and family colonies. Civilians who had never hurt anyone. A low rumble of conversation started among some delegates. The Kelvins were known for their aggressive expansion, but they usually picked on species even smaller than humans. Ambassador Thekmore of the Nexus Confederation projected a holographic display above his mechanical form. Numbers and charts appeared in the air, showing the military strength of various species. The Kelvin Empire's numbers were massive compared to the small bar representing human forces. "The Terran Federation has sent formal complaints through proper diplomatic channels," Tae-ho said. "We have requested mediation. We have offered to negotiate. All of our attempts at peaceful resolution have been ignored or rejected." Admiral Park Ji-woo shifted in her seat. Her face remained calm, but her hands were clenched into fists. She had served on the border worlds and had seen the aftermath of Kelvin raids. General Lee Bo-ram sat perfectly still, but her eyes never stopped moving, watching the reactions of different species around the chamber. "Therefore," Tae-ho said, his voice growing stronger, "the Terran Federation formally declares its position to this council and to the galaxy." The chamber grew quieter. Even species that had been ignoring the human speaker began to pay attention. Any further attacks on human settlements will be considered acts of war against the Terran Federation. We will respond with all available force. We will hunt down those responsible for these attacks no matter where they hide. We will pursue them to the edges of known space if necessary. Tae-ho paused and looked around the chamber. He could see the expressions changing. Amusement was replacing the mild interest on many faces. "We will not stop," he continued. "We will not give up. We will not forgive these attacks on our people, and we will not forget who is responsible for them." The silence that followed lasted for exactly 3 seconds. Then Counselor Vextar began to laugh. It was a harsh hissing sound that echoed through the chamber. Within moments, dozens of other delegates joined in with their own versions of laughter. High Delegate Morgeth pulsed with bright yellow and orange colors that Dr. Choi Hee-jin knew meant extreme amusement among Zephyrians. Ambassador Thekmore's mechanical form projected new holographs showing the size difference between human and Kelvin territories. Humans, Vextar said when the laughter died down. You are a single-world species that learned to travel between stars only 300 years ago. The Kelvin Empire controls over 1,000 star systems. They have fleets that outnumber your entire population. More laughter rippled through the chamber. A delegate from the insectoid hive clusters made clicking sounds that their translator rendered as mocking chittering. Your threat is noted, Vextar continued, and dismissed as the posturing of a species that does not understand its place in the galactic order. Trade Minister Velkar of the Mercantile Guild stood up from his seat. His slug-like body glistened under the chamber lights as he spoke. Perhaps the humans should consider offering tribute to the Kelvins instead of making empty threats. It would be more practical. This brought even more laughter. Some delegates were making jokes in their own languages, which their translators thankfully did not render into standard galactic. Teho stood perfectly still during all of this. His face showed no emotion, but inside he felt a cold anger growing, not at the insults to him personally, but at what this reaction meant for his people, for the families on the frontier worlds who looked to the Galaxy Council for protection. Dr. Choi Hye-jin made careful notes on her datapad. She recorded which species laughed the hardest, which ones seemed more sympathetic, and which ones simply looked bored. This information would be important later. Chancellor Kethnis called for order, though he was still smiling. The tall, thin leader of the Council's executive branch had pale blue skin and large black eyes that many species found unsettling. Humans thought he looked sad all the time, but right now he clearly found the situation amusing. The Terran Federation's statement has been recorded in the official proceedings, Kethnis announced. The Council will consider appropriate responses in due time, perhaps at the next quarterly session. Teho knew what due time meant in Council language. It meant never. It meant that human problems were not important enough to worry about. Thank you, honorable delegates, Teho said with perfect politeness. The Terran Federation hopes that this body will remember this day when you are called upon to explain your actions to history. As the human delegation prepared to leave, Captain Han Min-soo of the reconnaissance vessel, Persistence received a coded signal on his communication device. He was supposed to be observing the proceedings from the public gallery, but his real job was intelligence gathering. The captain quietly activated his ship's quantum communicator and sent a brief message toward Earth. The transmission would take weeks to reach home, but it would arrive long before any official diplomatic reports. The message was simple: Council session complete. Warning delivered. Response mockery and dismissal. Recommend immediate implementation of contingency protocols. As the humans walked out of the chamber, the other delegates were already moving on to more important business. Trade agreements between major powers, territorial disputes between ancient civilizations, the real work of running a galaxy. None of them noticed that the humans were not angry or upset as they left. They were calm, determined, and they were taking very careful notes about who had laughed the loudest. In the corridor outside the chamber, Admiral Park Ji-woo spoke quietly to her companions. Well, we tried the diplomatic approach. General Lee Boram nodded. They made their choice. Now they get to live with the consequences. Dr. Choi Hye-jin continued writing on her datapad. I want a full psychological profile of every species that participated in that mockery. When this is over, we're going to need to understand exactly how we got here. Ambassador Teho said nothing as they walked toward their ship, but in his mind, he was already composing his report to the President and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. 3 simple words that would change the course of human history. Diplomacy has failed. Behind them, the Galaxy Council continued its business, completely unaware that they had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. They had dismissed a species that took promises very, very seriously. The humans had warned them. They had tried to do things the civilized way. Now they would do things the human way. The morning sky over New Busan was the color of fresh peaches when the first Kelvin ships appeared. Colonial Administrator Song Yu-jin was drinking her coffee and reading reports from the grain harvest when the emergency sirens started screaming across the settlement. She ran to the communication center, her bare feet slapping against the cold metal floors. The building shook as something massive passed overhead, casting shadows that moved like storm clouds across the agricultural domes that surrounded the main colony. "Report!" she shouted over the noise. Defense Coordinator Oh Sang-wook was already at the main console, his hands flying over the controls. His face was pale but determined. Behind him, 3 junior officers worked frantically to coordinate with the orbital defense platforms. "Kelvin Battle Fleet," he said without looking up. 67 ships. They dropped out of hyperspace 15 minutes ago and ignored all our communication attempts. Song Yu-jin felt her stomach drop. New Busan had 50,000 people living in it. Most of them were farmers, teachers, doctors, and engineers. They had some defensive weapons, but nothing that could fight a real military fleet. "Send the evacuation signal," she ordered. "All civilians to the emergency shelters. Priority transport for children and elderly." The colony had practiced this many times, but it had always been just an exercise. Now people ran through the streets carrying whatever they could grab. Parents pushed children toward the transport vehicles while others helped elderly neighbors who moved too slowly. Dr. Yoon Ji-hee was in the children's hospital when the alarm started. She had been checking on her youngest patients, kids who were too sick to move quickly. Now she stood looking at 23 children who needed medical equipment to stay alive. "We can move them," her head nurse said. "But it will take time." Dr. Yoon looked out the window. The Kelvin ships were getting closer. She could see their weapons charging up, crackling with energy that made the air itself seem to buzz. "Start moving them," she said. "I'll stay with anyone who can't be moved safely." Her nurse started to argue, but Dr. Yoon cut her off. "Someone has to stay with them. They're just children. They shouldn't have to face this alone." In the defense center, Oh Sang-wook was coordinating with the planetary militia. They had 12 orbital defense platforms, each armed with particle beam weapons. They had 36 fighter craft flown by volunteers who had trained on weekends. Against 67 military warships, it would not be enough. "Sir," one of his officers said, "we're getting a transmission from the lead Kelvin ship." "Put it through," Oh Sang-wook replied. The hologram that appeared showed a Kelvin commander. His species looked like large insects that stood upright with compound eyes and clicking mandibles. This one wore armor decorated with symbols that marked him as high-ranking. "I am War Commander Zilthak of the Kelvan Imperial Fleet," the alien said. His translator made his voice sound cold and mechanical. "This world is now claimed by the Kelvan Empire. Surrender immediately, and you will be allowed to serve as worker slaves. Resist and you will be eliminated." Oh Sang-wook stepped forward. "This is Defense Coordinator Oh Sang-wook of New Busan Colony. This world is protected by the Terran Federation. Your attack is illegal under galactic law." Zilthak made a clicking sound that might have been laughter. "The Terran Federation is not recognized by the Kelvan Empire as a legitimate power. You have 1 hour to surrender." The transmission ended. Oh Sang-wook turned to his officers. "Send emergency signals to Earth and to the Galaxy Council. Maximum priority. Tell them we need help immediately." Song Yu-jin activated the colony-wide communication system. Her voice echoed from speakers throughout New Busan. "Citizens, this is Administrator Song. We are under attack by hostile forces. All evacuation protocols are now in effect. Stay calm, help your neighbors, and follow the instructions of emergency personnel." The next hour passed like a nightmare. Transport ships lifted off carrying as many people as they could hold. The orbital defense platforms powered up their weapons and prepared for battle. Fighter pilots said goodbye to their families and climbed into cockpits they knew they might never leave. But the help they needed never came. The transmission from Earth arrived after 45 minutes. It was brief and formal. Message received. Fleet deployment authorized. Estimated arrival time 6 weeks. 6 weeks was far too late. The message from the Galaxy Council came 10 minutes before the deadline. It was even worse. Request for immediate assistance has been forwarded to the appropriate committees for review. Expect response within standard processing time of 90 to 120 days. Oh Sang-wook stared at the screen in disbelief. "They want us to wait 4 months?" Song Yu-jin closed her eyes. "They're not coming," she said quietly. "We're on our own." When the hour was up, War Commander Zilthak did not bother with another transmission. The Kelvin fleet simply began firing. The orbital defense platforms died first. They managed to destroy 3 Kelvin ships and damage several others, but it was like throwing stones at a mountain. The platforms exploded in brilliant flashes of light that could be seen from the surface. The fighter squadron lasted 18 minutes. The pilots fought with desperate courage, using tactics they had learned from human military history. They flew in patterns that confused the Kelvin targeting systems and struck at weak points in the enemy formation. But there were too many enemy ships and not enough human fighters. Captain No Eunji led the fighter squadron in their final attack. She dove her craft straight at Zilthak's command ship, firing everything she had. Her last transmission was heard throughout the colony. "Tell my daughter I kept my promise. Tell her Mama fought for her." When the orbital defenses were gone, the bombardment of New Busan began. The Kelvins did not aim for military targets. They aimed for the city centers, the schools, the hospitals, the farms. They wanted to break the spirit of the defenders by destroying everything they cared about. The emergency shelters held for a while. They had been built deep underground and reinforced with the strongest materials the colony could afford, but they were not designed to withstand military-grade orbital bombardment. Song Yoo-jin died in the first wave, crushed when the administrative center collapsed on top of her. Oh Sang-wook lasted longer, coordinating rescue efforts from a mobile command post until a direct hit vaporized half the city center. Dr. Yoon Ji-hai stayed in the children's hospital until the end. When the building began to shake apart, she gathered the sickest children around her and sang them old Korean lullabies. The rescue workers found her 3 days later, her body wrapped protectively around a 5-year-old boy who somehow survived. The bombardment continued for 6 hours. When it was over, New Busan looked like the surface of a dead moon. The agricultural domes were shattered. The city center was a crater. The orbital shipyard where the colony had been building its first real warship was nothing but floating debris, but the Kelvins were not finished. Landing ships descended from the fleet and began collecting survivors, not to help them but to take them as trophies. It was an old Kelvin tradition. After conquering an enemy, they would take some of the survivors back to their home worlds as living proof of their victory. War Commander Zilthak personally selected the prisoners. He chose people who looked strong or intelligent, people who would make impressive displays in Kelvin victory parades. Among them was Dr. Yoon Ji-hee, who had survived the bombing but was badly injured. The rescue ships from Earth arrived 5 weeks later. They found a dead world and empty space where the Kelvin fleet had been. The only sign of what had happened was the debris field in orbit and the crater that had once been a thriving human colony. The captain of the rescue fleet, Admiral Lim Jae-sung, walked through the ruins of New Busan wearing a radiation suit. He recorded everything he saw with cameras that would carry the images back to Earth: the burned playgrounds, the melted medical equipment, the child-sized graves that the few survivors had dug. When he returned to his ship, Admiral Lim composed 2 messages. The first went to Earth, to the President and the military command. It was a formal report listing casualties, damage assessment, and tactical analysis of the attack. The second message went to his old friend Admiral Park Ji-woo, who was still traveling back from the Galaxy Council session. This message was much shorter. They kept their word. New Busan is gone. 50,000 dead. Survivors taken as slaves. The hunt begins now. 3 months after the attack, Ambassador Taeho returned to the Galaxy Council chamber. This time he did not come to make threats or ask for help. He came to show the other species what they had chosen by their inaction. The holographic display he activated showed the ruins of New Busan. It showed the faces of the dead children. It showed the footage of Kelvin soldiers dragging away human survivors in chains. It played the final transmissions from the defenders, the voices of people who had died waiting for help that never came. The chamber was quiet as the images played. Some delegates looked away. Others whispered among themselves. A few seemed genuinely shocked by what they were seeing. When the display ended, Taeho spoke in a voice that carried no emotion at all. 3 months ago, I stood in this chamber and warned you that the Kelvins would attack our colonies. You laughed. High Fleet Admiral Lim Jae-sung stood in the war room deep inside Luna Base, staring at the star map that covered the entire wall. Red dots marked Kelvin systems. Blue dots showed human colonies. The difference in numbers was depressing. The Kelvin Empire controlled 1,200 star systems spread across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. Humanity had 47 systems, most of them small colonies with populations under 1 million. "Sir," Captain No Yunji said from behind him, "the fleet commanders are ready for the briefing." Lim turned to face the assembled officers. These were the best military minds humanity had produced in 3 centuries of space travel. Admiral Park Ji-woo, who had designed the new stealth frigates, General Lee Bo-ram, expert in ground operations, Captain Han Min-soo, who knew more about reconnaissance than anyone alive, and dozens of others, all wearing the grim expressions of people who understood what they were about to attempt. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lim began, "every computer model we have says this is impossible. The Kelvins have more ships, more soldiers, more resources, and more experience. By every logical measure, we should surrender now and hope they treat us mercifully." He pressed a button and the wall display changed to show footage from New Busan, the burned buildings, the crater where the hospital had been, the graves of 50,000 civilians. "But logic did not murder our people," he continued. "The Kelvins did. And they did it knowing the galaxy would do nothing to stop them. They counted on our weakness. They counted on our isolation. They were wrong." Director Im Hyo-rian of Terran Intelligence stepped forward. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. In her hands, she carried a data pad containing the most important document in human history. "Operation Nemesis is not about winning a traditional war," she explained. "We cannot match the Kelvins ship for ship or soldier for soldier. Instead, we will do something they cannot understand or defend against. We will turn warfare itself into a weapon." The plan she outlined was breathtaking in its scope and terrifying in its implications. Every human colony would become a military base. Every civilian would become part of the war effort. Every ship would become a weapon. The Terran Federation would transform itself from a normal government into something the galaxy had never seen before. A nation that existed only to destroy another nation. Master strategist Gong Hyun-woo presented the tactical details. He had studied every major war in galactic history, looking for lessons that humanity could use. The key was mobility and unpredictability. Instead of defending fixed positions, human forces would strike everywhere and anywhere the Kelvins were vulnerable. "They have 1,200 systems to defend," Gong explained. "We have 47 systems to hide in. They think in terms of territory and conquest. We will think in terms of targets and destruction." Captain Seo Min-jai of Psychological Operations had her own presentation. Her job was to turn the war into more than just military conflict. She would make it into a story that would spread throughout the galaxy. The story of a small species that refused to surrender no matter what the odds. "The Kelvins rule through fear," she said. "They conquer other species by convincing them that resistance is hopeless. We will change that. Every victory we win, every ship we destroy, every system we liberate will prove that the Kelvins can be beaten." The first phase of Operation Nemesis began 3 weeks later. Captain No Yunji, who had lost her sister in the New Busan attack, led a squadron of modified stealth frigates deep into Kelvin territory. Their target was not a military installation but a supply convoy, carrying food and equipment to Kelvin colonies in the outer rim. The attack lasted exactly 14 minutes. The human ships appeared out of nowhere, destroyed 12 cargo vessels and their escorts, then vanished back into hyperspace before Kelvin reinforcements could arrive. They left behind only wreckage and a simple message broadcasted on all frequencies. "This is for New Busan." War Commander Zilthak received the report while reviewing victory parades on the Kelvan homeworld. His compound eyes studied the tactical display with growing confusion. How had human ships penetrated so deeply into Kelvin space without being detected? "Increase patrols in Sector 7, he ordered his aide. "These humans are more clever than I expected, but they cannot hide forever." But the humans were not hiding. They were hunting. Commander Baek So-young led the second attack 3 days later, striking a mining operation in a completely different part of Kelvin space. Her fighters, disguised as civilian transports, waited until the mining ships were fully loaded with rare metals before revealing their weapons and destroying everything in the system. The pattern continued for weeks. Human ships would appear in Kelvin territory, destroy whatever targets they could find, then disappear again. They hit supply lines, mining operations, communication relays, and civilian shipping. Nothing was safe. Nothing was predictable, and the Kelvins could never seem to catch the attackers. Admiral Cheon Young-mi commanded the human fleet's largest operation during this phase. She led 60 ships in an attack on the Kelvin Forward Naval Base at Keftar. The base was supposed to be impregnable, protected by orbital fortifications and a permanent fleet of 200 warships. The humans did not try to attack the base directly. Instead, they waited until most of the fleet was away on patrol, then struck at the fuel depot that supplied the entire sector. Without fuel, the Kelvin ships could not pursue the attackers or even return to base. The entire sector was temporarily paralyzed, but the Kelvins were not helpless victims. Zilthak began to adapt his tactics, using the superior size of his fleet to set traps for the human raiders. When Commander Quan Hai Rin led her squadron against what appeared to be a poorly defended convoy, she found herself facing a full battle fleet that had been hiding in the system's asteroid field. Half of Quan's ships were destroyed in the ambush. She barely escaped with her life. Her frigate's hull cracked in leaking atmosphere, but even in defeat, the humans learned valuable lessons about Kelvin tactics and technology. The war escalated when Zilthak decided to retaliate by attacking another human colony. The world was called New Sol, home to 2 million people, but this time, the humans were ready. Colonel Kang Dong-hyun had been preparing New Sol's defenses since the day New Busan fell. Unlike the agricultural colony, New Sol was an industrial world with shipyards and weapons factories. More importantly, it had been turned into a fortress. When the Kelvin fleet arrived, they found a system filled with mines, automated weapon platforms, and hidden missile batteries. The human defenders did not try to meet the Kelvins in space combat. Instead, they forced the enemy to come to them, fighting a defensive battle that played to human strengths. The Battle of New Sol lasted for 6 days. The Kelvins eventually won, but at a terrible cost. They lost 40 ships and thousands of soldiers to capture a world that the humans had already evacuated. What they found was not a living colony, but a trap designed to kill as many Kelvins as possible. Dr. Choi Hye-jin, now serving as head of human military research, had been studying captured Kelvin technology and biological samples. Her discoveries changed the entire nature of the war. The Kelvins were not just another alien species. They were a hive mind, controlled by queen-like creatures that directed the actions of billions of worker soldiers. If we can find and eliminate the queens, she reported to the War Council, entire Kelvin fleets will become helpless. They literally cannot function without direct control from their leadership caste. This discovery led to the most daring human operation of the war. Captain Han Min-soo volunteered to lead a deep reconnaissance mission into the heart of Kelvin space. His job was to locate the breeding worlds where the Kelvin queens lived and bred their armies. The mission took 4 months. Han's ship, disguised as a damaged Kelvin vessel, traveled from system to system gathering intelligence. What he found was both encouraging and terrifying. The Kelvin Empire was much more fragile than it appeared, but it was also much larger than anyone had imagined. When Han returned with his data, the human leadership realized that they had 2 choices. They could continue fighting a guerrilla war that might last for centuries, slowly wearing down Kelvin forces while losing more and more human colonies, or they could attempt something that no species in galactic history had ever tried: the complete destruction of an interstellar empire. President Shin Kyung-ho made the decision in a closed session with his military advisors. The recording of that meeting would become one of the most important documents in human history. "Gentlemen and ladies," the president said, "we have learned something important about ourselves during this war. We thought we were fighting to protect our colonies. We thought we were fighting for survival. But we have discovered that we are fighting for something much more important. We are fighting to prove that some things in this universe cannot be conquered by force alone." He stood up and walked to the window of his office, looking out at the stars where human ships were even now carrying death to Kelvin worlds. The Kelvins believe that might makes right. They believe that the strong have the right to destroy the weak. The Galaxy Council agrees with them, or they would have helped us. But we will prove them all wrong. We will show the galaxy that some species, when pushed too far, become something unprecedented. 2 years had passed since New Busan burned, and the galaxy was beginning to notice that something unusual was happening in the Kelvan Empire. Trade routes that had operated safely for centuries were now dangerous zones where ships disappeared without trace. Kelvin military patrols sent distress signals that cut off mid-transmission. Entire star systems went dark, their communication networks destroyed by unknown attackers. Chancellor Kethnus of the Galaxy Council stood before the emergency session, his pale blue face showing more concern than most delegates had ever seen. Behind him, holographic displays showed the economic impact of what the media was calling the human-Kelvin conflict. The disruption of commerce in the affected sectors has reached critical levels, he announced to the assembled representatives. 17 major trade corporations have filed formal complaints about losses exceeding 2 trillion galactic credits. In the Terran delegation area, Ambassador Tejo sat quietly with his new staff. General Lee Boram had been reassigned from active military duty to serve as his military advisor. Dr. Choi Hye-jin now held the title of Science Attaché, though her real job was analyzing alien weaknesses for future exploitation. Counselor Vextar of the Sith Dominion rose from his seat, his reptilian features showing the irritation that had become common when discussing human activities. This situation has gone far beyond acceptable boundaries. The humans were supposed to be taught their place, not allowed to disrupt galactic commerce. High Delegate Morgeth of the Zephyrian Collective pulsed with orange and red colors indicating deep concern. Her crystalline form caught the chamber lights as she spoke. Our merchant fleets report that Kelvin space has become essentially impassable. Even vessels with neutral flags are being attacked by what appear to be human ships. Ambassador Thekmore of the Nexus Confederation projected new holographic data into the center of the chamber. The mechanical being's electronic voice carried undertones of what might have been admiration. Analysis indicates that human tactical capabilities have expanded far beyond initial projections. They appear to have developed technologies and strategies, not previously documented in their military profiles. What the Galaxy Council did not know was that Master Strategist Gong Hyun-woo had spent those 2 years studying every species in the galaxy. He had learned cyber warfare techniques from captured Nexus technology. His teams had reverse-engineered Zephyrian energy manipulation systems. They had even adapted the coordinated tactics used by the insectoid hive clusters. But the most dangerous development was not technological. It was psychological. Captain Seo Min-jae had turned her propaganda operation into something that reached across species boundaries. Her broadcasts were not just aimed at humans anymore. They targeted every oppressed population in Kelvin territory, every slave species that had been conquered and forced to serve the Empire. The message was simple and powerful. The humans remember. The humans do not forget. The humans do not surrender. Join us, and be free. On the former Kelvin colony world of Vectar Prime, a rebellion began when the local population of reptilian Sithkari received human weapons and training. The uprising lasted only 3 days, but it tied down an entire Kelvan battle fleet that could have been used elsewhere. Similar revolts broke out across Kelvan space. Some failed quickly, but others succeeded in liberating entire systems. Each success brought more species into what was becoming known as the Human Alliance, even though humanity remained the smallest member in terms of population. War Commander Zilthak stood in his command center aboard the massive dreadnought Imperial Dominance, studying reports that grew more disturbing each day. His empire was not just being attacked from the outside, it was being torn apart from within. "Sir," his aide reported, "we have confirmed that human advisors are present in the Theta Sector rebellion. They are training the insurgents in advanced guerrilla tactics." Zilthak's mandibles clicked in frustration. The humans were not fighting like any enemy he had ever faced. They seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Every time he concentrated forces to crush one threat, 3 more appeared in different sectors. "What is the status of our fleet strength?" he asked. The aide hesitated before answering. "Sir, we have lost approximately 30% of our combat vessels over the past year. Additionally, 15% of our remaining ships are tied down in anti-insurgency operations and cannot be deployed for offensive missions." The war commander turned to study the tactical display that showed the current state of his empire. Red zones marked areas under human attack. Yellow zones indicated regions with active rebellions. Green zones showed areas still under firm Kelvin control. There was much less green than there had been 6 months ago. "Bring me the human prisoners," Zilthak ordered. "I want to understand how they think." Dr. Yoon Ji-hai was brought to the command deck under heavy guard. She had been a prisoner for 2 years, and the medical equipment keeping her alive after the new Busan bombing made her movements slow and painful. but her eyes were still bright with intelligence and defiance. "You are losing," she said before Zilthak could speak. "Your empire is falling apart and you do not understand why." The war commander studied her through his compound eyes. "Your species is outnumbered 1,000 to 1. You have no hope of victory." Dr. Yoon smiled, and the expression was not pleasant. "You still do not understand what you have awakened. We told you we would hunt you forever. Did you think that was just words? You cannot hunt what you cannot find," Zilthak replied. "My fleet will withdraw to the core systems. We will consolidate our defenses and crush your scattered forces one by one." "That will not save you," Dr. Yoon said calmly, "because we are not just hunting your fleets. We are hunting your civilization itself." She was right, though Zilthak did not yet understand what she meant. Admiral Cheon Young-mi was at that moment leading the largest human fleet ever assembled toward the heart of Kelvin space. Her target was not a military installation or even a major colony. Her target was Kelvtar, the Kelvin homeworld itself. The fleet consisted of 300 ships, most of them converted civilian vessels loaded with weapons and volunteers who had lost family members in Kelvin attacks. They had been traveling for 6 months, using routes that Captain Han Min-soo had mapped during his reconnaissance missions. The Battle of Kelvtar began when the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace in the home system of the Kelvin Empire. The defenses were massive: orbital fortresses, planetary shields, and a standing fleet of 500 warships that had never left the system. Admiral Cheon did not try to defeat these defenses. Instead, she did something that shocked every observer. She ignored them completely. While the main Kelvan fleet moved to intercept the human attack, smaller human ships slipped past the outer defenses using stealth technology, perfected during 2 years of guerrilla warfare. These ships did not attack the planet directly. Instead, they began broadcasting. Captain Seo Min-jae's voice echoed across every communication frequency in the system. But she was not speaking to the Kelvins. She was speaking to the billions of slave workers who had been brought to the home world to serve in factories and construction projects. "People of 1,000 worlds," her message began. "You have been told that resistance is hopeless. You have been told that the Kelvins are too strong to defeat. Today we prove that wrong." As she spoke, the human fleet engaged the Kelvin defenders in space combat. The battle was brutal and desperate, with ships exploding like stars across the dark sky. But every explosion, every flash of weapons fire, every burning Kelvin ship proved her point. The psychological impact was devastating. If humans could penetrate to the very heart of the Kelvin Empire, if they could bring war to the homeworld itself, then perhaps the mighty Kelvin Empire was not so mighty after all. The human fleet fought for 3 days before withdrawing. They had lost half their ships, but they had accomplished something more important than military victory. They had shown the galaxy that the Kelvins were not invincible. More importantly, they had delivered a message that would be remembered long after the battle was over. Colonel Kwan Hai-rin, commanding the rear guard action that allowed the fleet to escape, sent a final transmission toward the planet as her damaged ship prepared to jump to hyperspace. "War Commander Zilthak," she said, "if you are listening, remember this day. We came to your homeworld. We fought your best fleets in your own system. We could have destroyed your planet, but we chose not to." She paused as Kelvin fighters closed in on her position. "We are not monsters like you. We do not murder civilians. But we want you to understand something very clearly. We can reach you anywhere. There is nowhere in the galaxy you can hide from us." The transmission ended as her ship jumped to safety, but the message had already spread throughout the system and beyond. The Galaxy Council received reports of the Battle of Kelvtar within days. The reaction was not what anyone expected. Instead of condemning human aggression or calling for peace negotiations, most species began quietly reevaluating their relationships with both humans and Kelvins. If humanity could strike at the Kelvin homeworld itself, what did that mean for the balance of power in the galaxy? Ambassador Tai-ho address. 5 years after New Busan burned, Ambassador Tai-ho walked through the Galaxy Council chambers for what everyone knew would be the last time. The massive hall that had once buzzed with the confident chatter of galactic politics was now filled with nervous whispers and worried glances. The Kelvin Empire no longer existed. War Commander Zilthak sat in a human prison cell awaiting trial for war crimes. The thousand-system empire that had terrorized smaller species for centuries had collapsed in less than 3 years, torn apart by rebellions, human attacks, and its own internal contradictions. But the Kelvin collapse was not why the Galaxy Council was afraid. They were afraid because humanity had not stopped there. Intelligence Chief Ryu Dongjin had spent 5 years compiling detailed files on every species that had refused to help during the New Busan crisis. Every delegate who had laughed at human warnings. Every government that had ignored human pleas for assistance. Every trade organization that had profited from Kelvin aggression. The humans had kept track of everything, and now they were collecting on old debts. Chancellor Kethnes called the emergency session to order, his pale blue face showing strain that had aged him decades in the past year. Around the chamber, seats that had been filled by proud delegates from major powers now sat empty. The Kelvin Empire was gone. The Nexus Confederation had disbanded after human cyber attacks crippled their computer networks. 3 other major civilizations had formally apologized to humanity and begged for mercy. The Council recognizes Ambassador Tae-ho of the Terran Federation, Kethnes announced, though his voice lacked its former authority. Tae-ho took his position at the central podium. He looked older than his years, marked by the weight of decisions that had reshaped galactic civilization. Behind him stood Admiral Park Ji-woo, now commander of the most feared military force in known space. General Lee Bo-ram had become the architect of humanity's new colonial policies. Dr. Choi Hye-jin served as humanity's chief xenobiologist, her knowledge of alien weaknesses legendary throughout the galaxy. Honorable delegates, Tae-ho began, and the irony in that phrase was now impossible to ignore. The Terran Federation comes before you today to announce several policy changes that will affect galactic commerce, territorial expansion, and diplomatic relations. He activated a holographic display that showed the current state of the galaxy. Huge sections of space that had once been marked in different colors for various empires were now shaded in human blue, not because humanity had conquered them, but because they controlled the hyperspace routes that connected them. Captain Han Min-soo had spent 3 years mapping every major trade route in the galaxy. His ships now monitored the most important passages between star systems, conducting what humanity politely called security inspections of all passing vessels. Effective immediately, Tae-ho continued, all commercial traffic through human-controlled space corridors will be subject to enhanced screening procedures. These procedures will ensure that no cargo or passengers pose a threat to galactic peace and stability. The screening procedures were devastatingly thorough. Ships from species that had supported the Kelvins found their cargo holds searched for weeks. Vessels from governments that had ignored human warnings discovered that their inspection schedules conflicted with important delivery deadlines. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for centuries now moved at the pace humanity chose to allow. Counselor Vextar of the Sith Dominion rose from his seat, his reptilian features showing the anger that had been building for months. This is economic warfare disguised as security policy. You have no legal authority to control galactic trade routes. Admiral Park Ji-woo stepped forward. Her cybernetic implants, earned during the brutal final assault on Kelvin Prime, caught the chamber lights as she smiled with predatory patience. We have the same authority the Kelvins claimed when they attacked our colonies. The authority of strength. She gestured toward the holographic display which now showed the current disposition of human military forces. The numbers were staggering. In 5 years, humanity had built a fleet larger than any single species had ever possessed. But more importantly, they had learned to use other species' own strengths against them. The difference, Admiral Park continued, is that we warned you this would happen. We told you exactly what would occur if you failed to act when innocent people needed help. You chose not to listen. High Delegate Morgeth of the Zephyrian Collective pulsed with rapid color changes indicating extreme agitation. Her crystalline form projected fractal patterns of distress across the chamber walls. You cannot punish entire civilizations for the actions of their governments. There must be proportionality in justice. Dr. Choi Hee-jin answered this objection. Her voice was calm and clinical, the tone of someone who had spent years studying exactly how far each species could be pushed before they broke. Proportionality? She repeated. 50,000 civilians died on New Busan. Proportional response would require us to eliminate 50,000 civilians from each species that refused to help. We have chosen to be more merciful. The silence that followed was absolute. Every delegate in the chamber understood that she was not making a threat. She was explaining a policy decision that had already been made and discarded in favor of something less severe. Fleet Admiral Lim Jae-sung, now the Supreme Commander of Human Military Forces, provided the details that made the new galactic order clear. His presentation was matter-of-fact, delivered in the tone of someone reading a weather report. The Terran Federation has established mutual defense agreements with 437 minor species previously oppressed by larger empires. We have provided them with technology, training, and protection in exchange for basing rights and resource agreements. What he did not need to say was that these smaller species now formed a network of human allies that stretched across the galaxy. Any major power that wanted to expand its territory or influence would have to go through dozens of human-protected systems first. Additionally, Lim continued, we have established what we call the Remembrance Protocol. This is a formal database containing detailed records of every government, organization, or individual that failed to provide assistance during humanitarian crises. The Remembrance Protocol was the galaxy's new nightmare. It was not just a list of enemies, but a comprehensive scoring system that determined how each species would be treated by humanity and its allies. Species that had actively helped oppressors found themselves completely cut off from human-controlled trade routes. Governments that had simply ignored humanitarian crises discovered that their colonial expansion requests were permanently delayed. Even individuals who had made particularly callous statements during the new Busan crisis found themselves unable to obtain visas for human space. Ambassador Thekmore of the Nexus Confederation attempted to project a holographic protest, but his mechanical systems flickered and died. Human cyber warfare specialists had become so sophisticated that they could disable enemy technology remotely, a lesson learned from studying Nexus methods during the Kelvin War. Chancellor Kethinus leaned forward desperately. What do you want from us? What will it take for the Terran Federation to return to normal diplomatic relations? Taeho looked around the chamber at the representatives of species that had once dismissed humanity as irrelevant. Some seats were empty because their governments had collapsed under human economic pressure. Others were occupied by new leaders who had overthrown regimes that had been too arrogant to take human warnings seriously. Normal diplomatic relations, he repeated thoughtfully. I think you misunderstand our position, Chancellor. We do not want to return to the old system where might made right and small species could be destroyed with impunity, while the galaxy looked away. He gestured toward the holographic display, which now showed a map of human-protected space. It was vast, encompassing not just human colonies but hundreds of worlds that had been liberated from various forms of oppression. We have created a new system, Taeho explained. A system where species that keep their word are rewarded, and species that break their promises face consequences. A system where calling for help actually brings help, instead of bureaucratic delays and empty sympathy. Director Im Hyorin stepped forward to provide the final details. Her small frame and gray hair made her look harmless, but every intelligence officer in the galaxy knew her reputation. She had orchestrated the fall of the Kelvin Empire and the transformation of galactic politics with the patient precision of a master chess player. The old galactic order failed, she said simply. It failed when it allowed the strong to prey on the weak without consequence. It failed when it treated genocide as a minor diplomatic incident. It failed when it laughed at species that begged for help. She paused to let her words sink in. We have replaced that failed system with something better. A system based on the simple principle that actions have consequences, and promises must be kept. The human delegation began to gather their materials, preparing to leave the chamber for the final time. As they moved toward the exit, Counselor Vextar called out in desperation, "You have become tyrants. You rule through fear!" Admiral Park Ji-woo stopped and turned back to face him. Her smile was sharp and cold. You taught us that fear was the only universal language in galactic politics. Use